Who carved these massive stone heads in Mesoamerica? Are they the faces of forgotten kings? And what can they teach us about the societies that created them? These are some of the biggest stone heads ever made, and they're hiding in plain sight. Tucked away at the bottom of a hill on the Tres Zapotes archaeological site in Mexico is the largest of the 3 Olmec heads. It weighs over 40 tons and is nearly 3 meters tall, making it about the size of an elephant's head. The other 2 giant heads are at the top of La Cobata in Mexico and the Tres Zapotes site, respectively. They face downward, each staring blankly ahead with crossed arms and wearing a type of headdress that looks like a bird's beak. But how exactly did they end up there? How were they moved? And most importantly, who carved them? To get to the bottom of this mystery, we need to go back in time to around 1200 BCE, when the Olmec civilization thrived along the Gulf Coast of Mexico. In the 19th century, archaeologists thought these colossal heads were the heads of giant mythical creatures. After all, how else could anyone carve such large heads and place them atop steep hillsides? But no one had yet found any evidence that the Olmecs had used wheeled vehicles or ramps or any other tools that would have helped them move such heavy objects. With no apparent technology to their name, the only possible explanation was that these heads had been crafted by giants. In the years since then, we've realized there were actually other ways to move very heavy things long before the invention of the wheel. This discovery came in 1938 when archaeologists uncovered a series of basalt heads in the same general area. At first glance, these heads looked totally different from the colossal heads. They were smaller, more crude, and much more numerous. But as time went on, archaeologists began to notice similarities between them. All the heads had flat backs and square ears like the giant heads. Some of the smaller heads even wore the same type of headdress as the big ones. It became clear that these were just different versions of the same thing. The only question was why. As the years passed, scientists got more and more clues. In 1978, archaeologists discovered a series of new sculptures at the Tres Zapotes site. One of them was a huge block of basalt with a human face carved into it. That might not sound too exciting, but they also found 2 T-shaped pieces nearby that fit perfectly into the sides of the sculpture, almost like a puzzle. When put together, they formed a giant rectangular block. This suggested to archaeologists that the Olmecs had used a technique known as stop and slab building to create these giant heads. This method is still used today to make large statues out of stone. First, a rough outer shell or mold is constructed. Then it's filled with smaller stones. Over time, the inside of the statue gets filled and the outer shell is removed. The result is a hollow but sturdy statue made of large stones. But stop slab building doesn't explain how the Olmec people moved these huge blocks of rock. For that, we have to look at another discovery made in the same general area. In 1992, researchers found a system of artificial canals that once connected several settlements along the coast. This raised some eyebrows because the nearest ocean is over 40 kilometers away. Why would the Olmecs have needed canals if they were so far from the sea? Well, it turns out that sea levels were much lower back then, meaning that the Gulf of Mexico actually reached the city directly. With access to the sea, the Olmecs could have built boats and used them to transport huge stones for their statues from around the coast. Or maybe they used their boats to float the stones across the water. Either way, they weren't carrying them on foot. With this knowledge, archaeologists were eager to take a second look at the colossal heads. Could they really be Olmec works of art? If so, that would mean that someone important was depicted on them. The question was, who? We don't know the names of either of these rulers. In fact, we don't know anything about their writing system at all. No one has ever deciphered it. But that doesn't mean we can't figure out a few things about them. First off, we know that the head at the top of La Cobata must have belonged to a king because only royalty was allowed to wear the fancy feathered headdress. Unfortunately, we don't know anything about the king himself, except that he probably died sometime before 400 BCE. This is because La Cobata was abandoned around that year, and all signs of the ruling class disappeared. The other two heads are harder to interpret. The head at Tres Zapotes is definitely facing the head of Lakobata, so it's likely that it depicts another ruler. But the third head doesn't seem to have a proper headdress. It might have originally had one, but erosion may have worn it down over the years. It could also be a female figure, which would be interesting, but it's hard to say for sure. There are many examples of Olmec women in the archaeological record, and we do not know if they had any female rulers. These giant heads aren't the only mysterious sculptures in the area. A bit further south, you'll find the Mesoamerica. This collection of strange statues is notable because the figures seem to be wearing strange helmets with ear flaps. Some of them appear to be missing parts of their bodies. But that may be because they were never finished, or perhaps they were intentionally left incomplete. One theory is that these statues represent members of a special warrior class. The helmets could be elaborate depictions of animal skulls meant to intimidate their enemies. But again, we don't know for sure. Researchers hope to learn more about these mysterious sculptures thanks to a new multi-year project called the Olmec Royal Project. By comparing the colossal heads with other Olmec art and artifacts, they hope to learn more about Olmec society and culture. Once they've analyzed the statues, they plan to do the same thing with the skulls of the elite class. By studying DNA from these individuals, they hope to better understand the health and lifestyle of the ruling class during the time that they lived. Maybe they'll even find some surprising connections between them and the kings that appear on the statues. For now, the identity of these rulers remains a mystery. But one thing's for sure. These massive stone heads are an impressive feat of engineering and a reminder of the many secrets of the ancient world that are yet to be uncovered. Who knows what other mysteries they might help solve in the future? Now you know why those stone heads were carved. But do you know why pyramids were built? Plus, how did the Inca make stone float? And check out these other videos.